An opinion poll has put Donald Trump ahead of Hillary Clinton for the first time. The Republican scored a 1-point lead over his Democratic rival in a random telephone survey of just over 1,100 likely voters. Democratic campaign aides have dismissed the result. Both main candidates have been out and about drumming up support in crucial swing states.
So if you live here, or in Michigan, or Pennsylvania, or Minnesota, those 4 places, you can change your vote to Donald Trump. Will make America great again, okay?
In a show of support for his former U.S. Secretary of State, President Barack Obama has hit the campaign trail. With Clinton wounded by FBI email disclosures, it's hoped Obama can work some of his magic.
Has she made mistakes? Of course, so have I. There's nobody in the public arena over the course of 30 years that doesn't make some. But she is a fundamentally good and decent person who knows what she's doing and will be an outstanding president.
Meanwhile, Clinton's been concentrating on the swing state Florida. Her aides are telling her, win there and it's in the bag. Back in 2000, it was where an election was won and lost. The state could be centre stage again.
At a roundtable event held in Moscow on Tuesday, leading Russian academics and political scientists discussed accusations of Kremlin meddling in the upcoming U.S. presidential election. The Democratic Party has repeatedly accused Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump of having direct ties to Russian President Vladimir Putin. However, on Sunday, the New York Times reported that an FBI inquiry into Trump's political and business dealings has found no clear link to the Kremlin. Experts say that Democratic efforts to paint Trump as a Russian agent are reminiscent of McCarthy-era propaganda. Although polls show that Russians tend to prefer Donald Trump over Hillary Clinton, experts are quick to point out that while Trump is perceived as less hostile to Russia, a major shift in U.S. policy leading to more cordial relations with Moscow could take years. However, there is serious concern in Russia about how the U.S. election will impact the ongoing crisis in Syria. Clinton has threatened to implement a no-fly zone over Syria should she be elected, which would seriously escalate the conflict. In a recent poll conducted by the Levada Research Center, nearly half of all Russian respondents said that they were worried the situation in Syria could lead to a third world war.
The head of Britain's domestic intelligence agency says Russia poses a growing threat to the UK and accuses Moscow of pushing its foreign policy in increasingly aggressive ways. With more details in London, here's Anastasia Churkina.
This time we're seeing spies accusing Russia of spying. Specifically, the head of the MI5 in this interview to The Guardian has been talking about Russia posing increasing threats to the UK stability, aggressively pushing its foreign policy through a handful of means such as propaganda, subversion, espionage and cyber attacks.
Moscow has dismissed British claims that Russia is acting in increasingly aggressive ways and using new technologies against the West. The Kremlin spokesman said Moscow is unable to take such baseless allegations into account as long as there is no evidence.
Syrian President Bashar al-Assad plans to remain in power until at least 2021. The Syrian leader, who was speaking in Damascus to an invited group of British and American journalists, promised a new era of openness and transparency, but said there would be no political change until his forces had won the war. Meanwhile, insurgents are continuing their offensive, launched last week against government-held western Aleppo. It's been more than a month since the Syrian army moved to retake the city's rebel-held eastern districts. Russia, which has shored up its ally, President Assad, with military support, has blamed a Western failure to rein in violent Islamists in Syria for the lack of progress in peace talks.
Russia has again turned on the West in the war of words over Syria. The defense minister told a meeting of military officials in Moscow that Western-backed rebels had been attacking civilians in Aleppo, even though Russian and Syrian air attacks had paused. He said peace talks had been delayed indefinitely as a result. Sergei Shoigu said, "This is how our partners understand their contribution to the fight against international terrorism in Syria. It's time for our Western partners to determine whom they are fighting, terrorists or Russia. Maybe they forgot who killed innocent people in terrorist attacks in Belgium, France, Egypt, Iraq and other countries." The minister also said Moscow had been surprised that Russian warships on their way to Syria had been denied access to Western ports, blaming pressure from the US and NATO.
Well, China is flying high and it wants the world to know it. A major air show in the southern city of Zhuhai marked the first public appearance of its latest stealth fighter. The Chengdu J-20 was the star of the show. China's touting the new aircraft as being undetectable by radar and a competitor to the U.S. Lockheed Martin F-22 Raptor. Dan Epstein is in Beijing. He explains China's larger aim within the show.
Something which has been much anticipated was now finally revealed, and many say it represents a great leap forward in China's combat capabilities. Now, there will be over 42 countries, over 700 different companies showcasing their latest offerings in aviation and aerospace. But really, China wants to show that it is also a big player when it comes to aerospace and aviation tech. It wants to narrow the technological gap between itself and America. In fact, China is soon set to overtake America as being the biggest market for the aviation industry. But also, there's a bigger goal in mind here. China wants to have much more impressive tech as it takes on a more assertive role in the South and East China Sea. So really, this tech is of the utmost importance to China as it starts to show that it is a big military player in its own right.
North Korea may be gearing up for another ballistic missile launch within the next 3 days. Citing 2 U.S. officials with knowledge of the issue, Fox Business Network reported Tuesday local time that the regime is preparing to launch an intermediate-range Busan missile in the next 24 hours to 72 hours. The timing of the possible launch is significant as it would come a few days before the U.S. presidential election. Pyongyang has record of launching provocations around its key anniversaries, but Washington believes this trend will change. After a recent meeting with U.S. officials in Washington, 2 South Korean lawmakers said there is a possibility the North could forge ahead with a nuclear test, ballistic missile launch, or even a provocation at the inter-Korean border before or after the U.S. presidential election or the presidential inauguration in January.
The U.S. Embassy in New Delhi issued a security message to American citizens in India on Tuesday to be vigilant following reports that Islamic State may be planning to attack targets there. Recent Indian media reports indicate ISIL's desire to attack targets in India, the advisory said, warning of an increased threat to places frequented by Westerners, such as religious sites, markets, and festival venues. ISIL is an acronym for the jihadist organization which has seized territory in Iraq and Syria. All U.S. citizens are reminded to maintain a high level of vigilance and take appropriate steps to increase their security awareness, the advisory said. Officials from the National Investigation Agency, India's counterterrorism unit, has been quoted as saying that an Indian man arrested last month in Tamil Nadu and charged with terrorism offenses had been an active member of Islamic State in Iraq.
Terrorists have tried to acquire guns from criminal gangs to carry out Paris-style atrocities in Britain, authorities warned Monday. A flow of illegal weapons through Eastern Europe has led to a record level of gun seizures in London and prompted concerns that extremists could arm themselves for a devastating coordinated attack. Temporary barriers, surveillance cameras on all tube subway trains, and greater use of cell phone alerts were among the security measures recommended for London in a major report submitted Friday to the city's mayor.
In neighbouring Iraq, heavy fighting is ongoing in the city of Mosul as the army, backed by the Kurds and the US-led coalition, try to regain control of the ISIL stronghold. Meanwhile, the liberation of Mosul might take its toll on Europe. German intelligence is warning that the defeat of ISIL there could spark attacks in Europe.
Of course we are on high alert, especially with ISIL having its back against the wall in Mosul. This is good, but this situation may alert its supporters in Europe, and that could lead to violent attacks.
Pope Francis has praised people who take in asylum seekers as he celebrated Mass with thousands of followers during his visit to Sweden. His comments in a football stadium in Malmö held special symbolism. The city has become a gateway for immigrants who've fled wars in the Middle East. Sweden's small Catholic community has grown, largely thanks to many refugees and migrants among its ranks. Citing Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, the Pope highlighted those who renounce their own comfort in order to help others. The country, which is largely secular, accepted tens of thousands of asylum seekers last year, in contrast to many other European nations. However, strains on the welfare system, as well as reports of crime committed by some newcomers, have prompted doubts among many Swedes. The main purpose of the Pope's visit was to take part in a joint commemoration with Lutherans on the 500th anniversary of the start of the Reformation.
Pope Francis has held an unprecedented event marking the 500th anniversary of the Protestant Reformation. The Pope traveled to Sweden to meet with the president of the Lutheran World Federation. The two leaders signed a joint statement pledging to improve relations between Catholics and Lutherans. This is the first time a pope has commemorated Martin Luther's revolt with such a symbolically powerful gesture.
An op-ed article in the Wall Street Journal is stirring fears that U.S. President Barack Obama may be scheming to force a diplomatic resolution on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict at the United Nations in the last days of his term.
The paper cites unnamed sources saying the White House has asked the State Department to develop an options menu for the president's final weeks. It goes on to report that one possibility would be to sponsor or at least allow a UN Security Council resolution condemning Israeli settlement construction. New American tax regulations could be introduced, revoking exemptions of those involved in the building. Obama could also back a draft setting the parameters for a final accord between the two sides, or even seek formal recognition of a Palestinian state at the UNSC. The American leader could exercise executive action to override opposition from Congress, which has long argued that Palestine lacks internationally recognized attributes of statehood, such as a defined territory or an effective government. Obama's critics say any such action may bolster the BDS movement, encourage the legal harassment of Israeli citizens and supporters abroad, and even potentially criminalize the Israeli army.
Mississippi Governor Phil Bryant asked the court to uphold a law that protects religious freedom. The law will let merchants and government employees cite their religious beliefs instead of being forced to provide services to same-sex couples. U.S. District Judge Carlton Reeves blocked the law before it could take effect July 1st. Bryant's attorney says, quote, "The law gives the opponents of same-sex marriage the same conscientious objector protections that federal law confers on the opponents of warfare, abortion, capital punishment, and physician-assisted suicide."
Governor of Alabama declaring a state of emergency and warning of a gas shortage after an explosion and fire in a major gas line. The Colonial Pipeline running from Houston, Texas to the port of New York and New Jersey, supplying much of the East Coast. That line rupturing for the second time in 2 months now, and tonight much of it remains offline.
That massive pipeline fire sending thick smoke into the air.
Look how black that smoke is.
Aerial footage showing the haze blanketing a vast swath of land just south of Birmingham, Alabama.
Sound like they have some injuries. I think we're going to start additional rescue units.
The fire erupting shortly before 3 p.m. Monday when the gas line was struck by a track hoe making repairs.
It looked like there was like a plane crash. I've never seen anything like this.
One worker killed and several others injured. As emergency responders raced to contain the blaze, the critical main gas line shut down part of a 5,500-mile pipeline, raising concerns of shortages and price increases at the pump. This explosion happened a few miles from where a pipeline leaked in September, causing a hike in gas prices in the southeast.
The track hoe that struck the gas pipeline was actually working to fix a problem from that earlier leak. It may take days or longer to get the main gas line reopened.
8 children between the ages of 3 and 14 were initially admitted to Children's Hospital. It's heartbreaking to hear that one of those children have died, and now we've learned a 9th child is now being treated at Children's Hospital. Seattle Children's Hospital shared the sad news Tuesday that one of 9 children suffering from a neurologic illness has died, though it's not known if the child had acute flaccid myelitis or AFM. Now another child has been admitted to Children's with similar symptoms that suggest a neurologic issue.
It's the onset of weakness of a limb, significant weakness, generally developing over the course of hours or days. It's not the sort of thing that any parent would miss.
The CDC does not know the cause, and AFM in and of itself is not contagious. It's the various illnesses that cause the spinal inflammation that can be contagious. And diagnosis does not dictate treatment.
Would we have changed our management of any of these patients if we had somehow magically known ahead of time that they had AFM? And the answer is we really would not have.
3 of the 9 patients initially admitted are currently still hospitalized. 5 have been released from the hospital and are on the road to recovery. 7 are being evaluated for AFM.
Well, a medical mystery is being investigated in Montgomery County. It's a lung infection that has been linked to water.
Health reporter Stephanie Stahl says the illness is rare, but the number of patients is growing.
The unlikely victims are white, thin, postmenopausal women who live in affluent neighborhoods around the main line.
It's frightening, I think.
It's a lung infection similar to tuberculosis that's caused by a bacteria found all over, in soil, the air, and mainly in water.
This is in all of our water. We're all exposed to it every day when we take a shower. This is being researched very extensively right now.
Mainline health pulmonologist Leah Landy does not want to cause unnecessary hysteria, emphasizing that the lung infection called non-tuberculous mycobacteria, or NTM, is very rare. She treats about 100 patients a year. Symptoms include a cough and fatigue.
All of this white area, that's all infection and inflammation.
A study from the American Thoracic Society and NIH in 2012 identified 7 significant clusters of NTM around the country, one being the greater Philadelphia metropolitan area, with significant clusters found in Montgomery County. Dr. Landy says the bacteria can be especially dangerous when it's aerosolized in the shower or from a humidifier, even with dirt that blows in the air. Aqua Pennsylvania, which supplies water to the area, says it does not test for the bacteria because it's not a regulated contaminant and there is no EPA-approved method to measure it.
And I want to share with you guys some interesting posts that I got on my Facebook page. Bellant felt it at 51st and Harvard. Sounded like someone was running upstairs. Susie, we live in a 2-story house in Henrietta, and the earthquake was felt throughout our house. Coffeyville, Kansas heard and felt it. Collinsville did not feel it, this person says. But listen to this. In Glenpool, I was sleeping. It rattled me awake. I heard it and felt it shaking the whole house. Everything in here rattled. And just lastly, Randy in Muskogee. Felt it in Muskogee, not nearly as long as the September quake, but strong enough to shake the windows.
He may look like an ordinary high schooler, but this teen's story of extraordinary kindness is going viral. Sunday, the teen saw an elderly woman struggling to get into a store, and that's when he stepped in. He was unaware his aunt was photographing everything.
He says he was afraid she was going to fall. That's why he ran over to help. He says what surprised him, though, was seeing all of the adults just standing around.
I was just doing a good deed for a lady.
Sanquavius driver wasn't expecting to get the amount of attention he's received for helping a woman walk into a store. Sunday, he was shopping at the store with his brother and cousin. When he came out, he noticed a woman who needed help.
She couldn't get up. And there was a lot of grown men just walking past her. So I just put the stuff down and went over there and helped her.
He didn't just help her into the store, but shopped with her before helping her back to her car. Sanquavius' aunt, Constance Sweet, says she was brought to tears by her nephew's kindness.
I was taking pictures, and he didn't know it, but I was just so proud. That's why I was taking the pictures. And then just to see the look on her face when she came out and she was smiling, oh God, I was boo-hooing.
Constance posted the photos on Facebook, and since then, they've gone viral.
I didn't expect all this at all, you know, but I'm just happy y'all noticing him because he's a good kid.
For Sanquavius, he just doesn't understand why so many people turned a blind eye to the woman.
You can tell that she was hurt. I just tell them they wrong for doing that. Not even helping. They didn't even try to help. They just looked at her and kept walking.
I was just proud, and I was happy, you know, that was my nephew doing that. Nobody told him to do it.